You didn't become cold. You became accurate. There's a kind of person who used to be the first to show up and is now the last to answer. Not because they stopped caring, but because at some point caring became a full-time job with no pay, no days off, and a staff of exactly one. And that person was you. Maybe you haven't texted anyone in weeks. Maybe your birthday passed quietly. No plans, no party, no announcements. Someone asked if you wanted to hang out, and you said you were busy. And here's the thing. You weren't lying. You were busy. Busy protecting the one resource you stopped taking for granted, your own energy. People see that from the outside and they call it cold. They say you changed, that you closed off. But what they're not asking, what nobody asks, is what happened before that. So let's actually talk about that. There was a version of you who showed up for everyone. You were the one who picked up at midnight when things fell apart. The friend who drove 40 minutes to sit with who just needed a body in the room. The family member who kept the peace even when you were the one falling apart inside. The partner who listened, again, to the same argument, the same complaint, the same spiral. You were the one people called when life got hard. And you answered every single time. You organized the dinners. You remembered the anniversaries. You sent the check-in texts that never got replied to. You were the one who always adjusted your schedule, your plans, your needs to make room for everyone else. And then one day you needed something. Could have been small, a favor, a phone call, someone to just show up the way you always did. And what you got back was silence, or a sorry to hear that landed with no weight behind it, or a let's talk soon that meant never. And something in you did the math, not consciously, not dramatically. You didn't storm off or send the long text. Your brain just quietly ran the numbers. How much goes out, how much comes back, and looked at the results. And the results were devastating, and the exit wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no final speech, no long text where you finally said everything you'd been holding. You just quietly stopped being the one who reached out first. Stopped adjusting. Stopped filling the silence. Nobody else seemed to notice. You wanted to see just once what would happen if you let the space sit there. Most of them never filled it. And honestly, that answered more than any conversation ever could. And here's what people keep getting wrong about you. They assume you pull back because closeness makes you uncomfortable, that you're afraid of being known, afraid of letting someone in. That's not it. You don't pull back when people get close. You pull back when they show you they can't be trusted with what you give them. There's a difference, and it's not a small one. You're not running from connection. You're running an accurate read on who actually deserves it. Sitting alone on a quiet night is more comfortable than sitting across from someone who drains you and calling it friendship. That's not isolation. That's just finally being honest about what you need. Here's what's fascinating about that moment. It wasn't a decision you made. It was a conclusion your nervous system reached before you did. Psychologists who study stress in the nervous system have found that when people experience repeated emotional drain, giving, absorbing, carrying, without reciprocity, the brain doesn't wait for a conscious choice. It shifts modes. It moves from social openness into something more like self-protection. Not because you broke, because the system worked exactly as designed. Your nervous system learned, over years, that certain kinds of closeness came with a hidden cost, that the warmth you offered usually flowed one direction, and eventually, it started protecting you the same way it'd protect you from anything that repeatedly hurt, by making you less available to it. That's not a character flaw. That's adaptive biology. But here's where it gets deeper, because for most people who find themselves cutting off, that biological response has older roots than they realize. Think about where you first learned what closeness feels like. Maybe you were the kid who read the room before you could read a book, who learned to scan a parent's face the moment they walked through the door, measuring the energy, calculating whether this was a safe moment to speak or a moment to disappear. Maybe your feelings were regularly called too much, Don't be so sensitive. Other kids have it worse. You're fine. Maybe you learned very early that needing people is a gamble. That asking for help sometimes meant hearing, figure it out yourself. That love and unpredictability arrive together, like a package deal you never ordered. Psychologists who study early attachment have found something striking. Those early experiences don't just shape how we feel. They literally wire how our brains process social information as adults. The threat detection parts of the brain become more sensitive, more calibrated, more on. In other words, the child who had to read the room became the adult who can read a room from across the building. And that adult, you learned that the safest place was often alone. Now we get to the part that changes everything. People think the loneliest you've ever been is now, in the quiet, in the solo nights and the birthdays with no plans. But that's not true, is it? The loneliest you ever felt was before. Sitting in a room full of people who called themselves your friends and feeling fundamentally invisible. Being in a relationship and still feeling like nobody was actually there, surrounded by noise that had nothing to do with you. Physical isolation didn't create the loneliness. It just stopped hiding it. That's the insight nobody puts in the self-help books. The silence you live in now isn't emptiness. It's the absence of noise that was never filling anything anyway. What felt like peace was always possible. It was just buried under all that performing, all that adjusting, all that pouring into cups that didn't hold water. One of the most cited long-term studies on human well-being, Harvard's 85-year project on adult development, found that what actually predicts health and happiness over a lifetime is the number of people in your life. It's the quality of those relationships. Whether the people around you actually see you. You weren't failing at connection. You were succeeding at spotting its counterfeit version. And here's what people don't give you credit for. You got very, very good at that. You know exactly how it starts. The friend who only texts when something's wrong in their life. The one who opens every conversation with their problems and closes it before you can mention yours. You spotted it by month 2, maybe sooner. You didn't have to think about it. Your brain already knew. The family member whose compliments always have a small, sharp thing hidden inside them. The one who asks how you're doing right before they tell you why you're doing it wrong. You've had years of practice reading that particular rhythm. The person who showed up intensely, made you feel seen, then disappeared when you actually needed them. You felt the cycle start even before it completed. That slight shift in tone, the responses getting shorter, the "we should hang out soon" that both of you know means never. Some researchers describe this as hypervigilance, a heightened sensitivity to social cues developed through early experiences with inconsistency. But that clinical word undersells what it actually is. It's not paranoia. It's pattern recognition trained by thousands of hours of real data. You've been collecting it your whole life. You became fluent in a language most people don't even know exists. The language of what people mean when they don't say what they mean. The way effort flows only one direction. The way someone's behavior only changes when you stop being useful to them. You learn to translate every "I've just been so busy" in real time. And when your system says this will cost more than it gives, you've learned to listen. Not because you're bitter, because you've been proven right too many times to ignore it. And then, when you finally go quiet, something interesting happens. Some people don't ask what's wrong. They don't wonder what they might have missed or what it cost you to keep showing up for so long. Instead, they make you feel guilty for leaving. Suddenly, you're the cold one, the difficult one, the one who changed. There's this quiet pressure, sometimes said out loud, sometimes just implied, that your absence is something you owe them an explanation for. Here's what I've noticed. Guilt is almost always the last move people make when they've run out of better ones. Because if they genuinely cared about what you were going through, the first question would be, "Are you okay?" Not, "Why are you being like this?" The difference between those two questions tells you everything. And what replaces the anger faster than you'd expect isn't bitterness. It's something quieter. Indifference. Not cruelty. Just you stop replaying the conversations. Stop composing the things you'd say if you saw them again. Their opinion of you, the story they tell about why you left, stops landing. And that indifference isn't something broken in you. It's the first something is finally healing. There's a word that gets thrown at people like you. Isolated, withdrawn, antisocial. People say it like something's missing, like you're a puzzle with pieces lost. But those words assume you want something you don't have. They assume the quiet is a wound. What if it's not? There's a distinction worth holding on to here. Loneliness is the ache for connection you want and can't find. Solitude is the peace that comes from choosing your own company and meaning it. You're not sitting alone wishing someone would call. You're sitting in your space, finally able to hear yourself think. The phone is quiet, and that quiet feels like relief, not rejection. Relief. Someone once wrote something that stuck with me. Some people pay thousands of dollars in therapy to find the peace you built for yourself. And there's something true in that, not that therapy isn't valuable, but that the stillness you've found, you earned it. It costs something to get here. The people who don't understand will say you're running away. Let them. You know what you're running toward. Toward a version of yourself that doesn't exist in constant noise. Toward the ability to hear what you actually want, feel what you actually feel, without the static of everyone else's needs drowning it out. That's not avoidance. That's the thing you were trying to find the whole time. Here's what nobody gives you permission to hear. You don't have to be ready to try again yet. You're allowed to stay in the quiet a little longer. You're allowed to still be in the phase of recovering what all that noise cost you. The nervous system that learned to protect you can also learn to trust again. But it learns on its own timeline, not anyone else's. And when that time comes, the difference between a wall and a boundary matters. A wall doesn't move, regardless of who's on the other side. A boundary is selective. It opens for people who earn access through consistency, not just familiarity. People who show up in the small moments, not just the dramatic ones. Who check in because they thought of you, not because they need something from you. If your circle is small right now, that's not failure. It's discernment. It's saying, I know what the wrong kind of connection costs, and I'm not paying that price again just to avoid being alone. You're not cold. You're careful. And careful, when you've been burned enough times, is one of the most honest things you can be. You can miss certain people and still know leaving was right. You can remember the good parts of someone, the version of them that showed up, that seemed to care, and still not want them back in your life. Those two things sit together just fine. You're not grieving a fantasy. You're grieving what it actually could have been if they'd stayed consistent. That kind of grief is real. It just doesn't mean you go back. You're here. You're watching this, which means some part of you is still paying attention to what connection could look like if it were done right. Hold on to that part. Because it's not the absence of love that brought you here. It's the presence of a standard the people in your past couldn't meet. That's not a reason to be ashamed. That's a reason to be very, very selective about who gets to walk back in. If this felt like the video was reading your mind, drop a comment. I read every single one, and I want to know what landed.